I remember the sound of my own breathing in the helmet. That's what stays with me most awe. Not the battles, not the orders, not even the faces of my brothers. Just that rhythmic hiss and click, filtered through the vocabulator, constant as a heartbeat. In and out. In and out. The sound that told me I was alive, that told me I had purpose, that told me I was exactly what I was designed to be. They decommissioned Facility 7 on Anaxes 3 months after the war ended. I know because I counted the days on the wall of my bunk with the edge of a ration tin. 73 marks before they told us the Republic had become something else, something called an empire, and that our services were no longer required. I made the 74th mark that night anyway, because routine was all I had left, and because my hands needed something to do besides shake. We were CT units, Creche Company, 2nd Battalion. Not the elite. Not the ones who served with Jedi generals or fought in the campaigns they'd write about. We held supply depots. We guarded fuel stations. We processed logistics reports in underground bunkers, while the real war happened somewhere else, always somewhere else. I told myself it mattered. I told myself every role served the Republic, that even the smallest gear kept the machine running. The Kaminoans told us that too, back on Tipoca City, when we were still wet behind the ears and proud of our purpose. The smell of the facility was recycled air and hydraulic fluid, always hydraulic fluid. The depot handled cargo transports, and something was always leaking, always dripping into the Durasteel grates beneath our boots. You'd walk the corridors and hear it, that constant drip, 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 echoing off metal walls. At night, when the transports were grounded and the civilian workers had gone home to families we'd never have, that dripping was the only sound. That and breathing. Always breathing. I was CT 7894. The men called me Bracket because I'd scored high on systems analysis during training. Brackets, parentheticals, order of operations. Ah, the kind of mind that sorts and files and follows protocol. It wasn't a compliment, not really, but it was a name, and that mattered. Names were how we told ourselves apart, how we pretended we weren't just numbers stamped onto identical flesh. There were 47 of us at Facility 7 when the war ended. 47 clones and maybe 300 civilian support staff, AL mechanics, quartermasters, data handlers, the kind of people who kept armies fed and fueled. They had families on Anaxes, houses in the bombed-out cities we'd helped defend. They had somewhere to go. We had barracks and duty rosters, and the absolute certainty that we existed to serve. The first indication something was wrong came during a supply requisition review. Standard procedure. I'd input the monthly consumption reports, cross-reference them against projected garrison needs, submit them to High Command for approval. I'd done it 1,000 times, but this time the system returned an error code I'd never seen. Unit designation invalid. Verify authorization. Tut-at. I verified. I input the codes again. Same error. Do you own a soul? I must to undercasting unto me. Commander Thrasai, CT4, 4471. 10 years our senior, if you counted by deployments, which we did. Told me to ignore it. System glitch, he said. Transition period. Lot of departments getting reorganized now that the separatists are gone. But his voice had something in it I'd never heard before. Uncertainty. Did you our own Johnson? Doubt. Doubt. The kind of thing they'd trained out of us on Camino. The kind of weakness that got men killed. I said yes sir and filed the report manually. But I noticed my hands were shaking again as I entered the data. The civilian workers started leaving 3 days later. Not all at once. Gradual, like water draining from a tank. First the ones with families off-world, then the specialists who'd been contracted through third-party firms, then the mechanics who'd served through the whole war, and had somewhere else they wanted to be. They shook our hands. My. Some of them cried. They told us we'd been good soldiers, that the Republic owed us everything. They used past tense, and I noticed, and I said nothing. Within 2 weeks, the civilian staff was down to 60, then 40, then 12. My dear Sir. The facility felt enormous with so few people in it, like a ship running on minimal crew, every footstep echoing too loud, every conversation carrying across empty corridors. We kept to our routines because that's what we knew. Morning inspection, equipment maintenance, patrol rotations, physical training in the cargo bay, running formations between stacks of supply crates that nobody came to collect anymore. The transports stopped arriving on day 41. I was on landing pad duty when I realized I hadn't logged a new arrival in 6 days. The pad was empty, except for 3 old consular-class cruisers that hadn't moved since before the war ended. Rust was forming on their landing struts. I filed a maintenance request and got back another error code. Facility scheduled for decommissioning. Non-essential maintenance suspended. Non-essential. I stared at those words on my datapad for a long time. Huh? I'd never been non-essential before. None of us had. Essential was our entire purpose, the reason we'd been grown and trained and deployed. We were the Republic's defense, its backbone, the men who held the line while Jedi and senators made speeches about freedom and justice. Essential. The words started appearing everywhere after that. In supply denials, in communications, logs, malware, in the terse, automated messages that replaced actual orders from high command, non-essential personnel to maintain current stations pending reassignment, non-essential expenditures suspended until further notice, non-essential facilities marked for closure. Commander Thrace called us together in the main assembly hall on day 53. All 47 of us, standing in formation the way we'd stood 10,000 times before. But this time there was no mission brief, no tactical overview, no purpose. He just stood on the platform and looked at us, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach turn over. High Command has issued decommissioning orders, he said. His voice was steady, professional, the voice of a man reporting on ammunition counts or supply levels. Facility 7 will cease operations in 30 days. Civilian staff have been reassigned. Clone personnel are to remain on site pending further instruction. Someone behind me, I think it was Matches, CT 8847. A young trooper who still believed the propaganda ashen, asked what our next assignment would be, where we'd be deployed, what unit we'd join. Thrace looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "There is no next assignment." What? The silence that followed was total. Not even breathing. Just 47 men, processing information their brains weren't built to handle. "The war is over," Thrace continued. His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. The way you talk to someone who'd been injured and didn't know how badly yet. The Republic doesn't need a grand army anymore. There are still some units in service, garrison troops, security forces, but most of the clone forces are being stood down, decommissioned, retired. What does that mean? Matches asked. His voice cracked. He was only 3 years old. Where do we go? Thrace didn't answer. He didn't have to. We all knew what we were. We'd been designed with purpose, grown with purpose, trained for purpose. Take away the purpose, and what was left? Just flesh in a uniform, breathing recycled air in a facility nobody needed anymore. The briefing ended. We were dismissed. I went back to my bunk and stared at the 73 marks on the wall, and wondered if I should keep counting. The rations started running low on day 60. Not critically, we had months of supplies stored in the depot, but the daily allotment got smaller. 2 meal packs instead of 3. Reduced calorie counts. The kind of rationing you implement when you're not expecting resupply. I checked the inventory logs and found requisitions that had been denied, transfer requests that had gone unanswered, Communications that disappeared into whatever bureaucracy had replaced the Republic. We were being forgotten. Well, erased. Not through malice, just through indifference. Through the simple administrative reality that we were numbers in a system that didn't need those numbers anymore. Some of the men started talking about leaving. Just walking out, finding civilian work, disappearing into the galaxy like all those deserters during the war. But where would we go? We looked identical. We had no family, no connections, no history beyond the Republic. We were soldiers. Take away the soldier part and we were nothing, just genetic copies of a bounty hunter who'd been dead for years. CT 9122 on. We called him Servo because he could fix anything mechanical. I actually tried it. Day 68. He just didn't show up for morning formation. We found him 2 hours later at the main gate, standing in the rain, staring at the road that led away from the facility. His armor was perfectly clean, regulation perfect, and he'd packed a small bag with personal effects. 3 days of rations, a change of clothes, a Republic credit chit with maybe 200 credits on it. I can't do this, he said when we found him. I can't just sit here and wait. There has to be something else. No. Commander Thrace was the one who convinced him to come back. I don't remember what he said. I just remember the look on Servo's face as he turned around and walked back through the gate, back to the barracks, back to the routine that was all we had left. He looked dead already, like something vital had been cut out of him, and all that remained was the shell, breathing and walking and following orders, because that's what the shell was built to do. He hanged himself 3 days later, used his rifle sling, and one of ventilation grates in the shower block. Someone found him during third shift, just hanging there, body swaying slightly from the recycled air current. His face was peaceful, more peaceful than I'd seen any of us look since the war ended. We buried him in the equipment yard behind the depot. No ceremony, no funeral, just 20 men with shovels digging a hole in the rocky annex's soil, while the drip, drip, drip of hydraulic fluid kept time like a clock. Commander Thrace said a few words. Something about duty and honor and sacrifice, but I wasn't listening. I was watching the hydraulic fluid pool in the grate, dark and viscous, and thinking about how easy it would be to just stop. Stop breathing. Stop counting. Stop being essential personnel in a galaxy that didn't need us anymore. The civilian government sent someone on day 75. An official from the Imperial Planetary Authority, which was what they were calling the bureaucracy now. Empire instead of Republic. Moth instead of governor. Same buildings, same officials, different insignia. He was a thin man with narrow eyes and a datapad full of forms, the kind of person who'd spent the war in an office while we'd bled for his safety. You're to vacate the facility within 2 weeks, he told Commander Thrace. I was there for the meeting, taking notes, following protocol even though protocol didn't mean anything anymore. The depot is being transferred to civilian administration. Your service to the Republic is appreciated. What about reassignment? Thrace asked. You? His voice was carefully controlled, professional, but I heard the edge underneath. What about our pensions? Our benefits? We served for years. We're entitled to. You're entitled to what the government decides you're entitled to. The official interrupted. He didn't look up from his datapad. The transition from clone forces to regular Imperial military is still being processed. You'll receive further instructions once your status has been determined. Our status? I said, I didn't mean to speak. The words just came out, sharp and bitter. What status? We're soldiers of the Republic. We fought your war. We bled for your. The official looked at me for the first time. Really looked at me? The way you'd look at a piece of equipment that had broken and needed replacing. You're property of the Kaminoan cloning facilities on extended lease to the Republic military, he said. His voice was flat, clinical, reciting facts from a legal document. With the dissolution of the Grand Army, those contracts are being reviewed. Your status as legal entities under Imperial law is still being determined. Legal entities. Not soldiers, not citizens, not even people. Just property whose ownership was in dispute. Well, he left an hour later. His transport lifted off from the landing pad, engines bright against the gray Anax's sky, and I watched it go and felt something break inside me that I didn't have a name for. Servo had been right. There was nothing else. This was it. This was what we'd fought for, bled for, sacrificed for. The right to be told we were property, that our lives and service and blood meant nothing beyond what some bureaucrat decided they meant. The fights started after that. Stupid fights, the kind born from rage and despair and too many men trapped in too small a space with too little purpose. Someone would say something harmless, and suddenly 2 men would be on the floor, beating each other bloody while the rest of us watched and did nothing. What was there to do? Report them? To who? For what? Breaking protocol that didn't exist anymore? CT 6632 on. Hardline, we called him, because he never broke regulations. Aimed to CT 5849 in the medbay after an argument about rations. Broke his jaw, 3 ribs, fractured his orbital bone. Hardline had been a model trooper his entire service. Never questioned orders, never complained, never showed anything but perfect discipline. And then one day he was slamming his brother's face into a Durasteel table over and over until someone pulled him off. We locked him in an equipment closet for 3 days. Not as punishment, just because we didn't know what else to do. He sat in there in the dark, not eating, not speaking, and when we finally let him out, he looked at us like he didn't remember who we were, like he'd gone somewhere else in his head and couldn't find the way back. The medbay supplies ran out on day 87. Bacta, Stimpaks, even basic antibiotics, all requisitions denied. Non-essential medical expenditures. CT5, 1849's jaw healed wrong. He couldn't eat solid food anymore, just ration paste and water, and when he spoke, his words came out slurred and painful. He stopped speaking after a while, just sat in the mess hall during meal times, staring at nothing, jaw hanging slightly askew. I kept counting days on the wall. Day 90, UY. Day 100. Day 112. The numbers meant nothing, but I kept counting, because stopping would mean admitting there was nothing to count toward, no purpose to the passage of time beyond the slow grinding down of hope into something darker. Commander Thrace stopped giving orders on day 118. Just stopped. He still did morning formation, still checked the duty rosters, still maintained the appearance of command. But when someone asked him a question, he'd just stare for a moment before answering, like he had to remember why any of it mattered. His eyes had that same look, Servo's did, that dead look, that I'm already gone look. We were down to 39 men by then, 2 more suicides, 3 who just walked away one night and never came back, 1 who got sick from bad rations and died in the medbay because we didn't have medicine, and nobody came when we called for help, 2 who got in a fight that went too far, and 1 of them didn't get up. 39 identical men in identical armor, standing identical watch over a facility that was already empty, already forgotten, already irrelevant. Ghosts haunting a tomb that used to be a fortress. The power started failing on day 123. Not all at once. Just brownouts, sections going dark, then flickering back on. The reactor was old, and we didn't have the parts to maintain it properly. The civilian mechanics were gone. We did what we could with our limited training, but there's only so much you can do when you're designed to fight, not to repair. The drip, drip, drip of hydraulic fluid got louder in the dark, more persistent. I know, like a heartbeat, like breathing, in and out, in and out. I'd lie in my bunk during the blackouts and listen to that sound and think about Servo hanging in the shower block, swaying in the artificial breeze, face peaceful, more peaceful than any of us. CT 7745 Aeon. Render, because he'd once sketched a pretty good portrait of General Skywalker in the dirt during a briefing. Started talking about the Jedi, about how they'd betrayed the Republic, how they tried to assassinate the Chancellor, how everything we'd been told was true. The official story. The propaganda. Now my soul, too. He recited it like prayer, like if he believed hard enough, it would all make sense. Like if he could convince himself the Jedi were traitors, then our purpose hadn't been wasted, our service hadn't been for nothing. But I'd seen the look in General Yura's eyes when Order 66 came through. We all had. She'd been at Facility 7 for a supply inspection, just routine business, and she'd been kind, asked after our welfare. Remembered our names, our real names, not our numbers. And when the order came through, Commander Thrace had executed it without hesitation, because that's what we were built to do. I wasn't there for the shooting. I was in the data archives when it happened, but I heard it. 3 blaster shots, sharp and final, echoing through the depot corridors. And then, silence. Terrible silence. The kind that weighs on you like atmosphere, like pressure, like the absolute absence of something that can never be replaced. They burned her body in the equipment yard. I watched, from a window, watched the smoke rise into the Annax's sky, dark and oily, carrying away whatever had made her a person, and leaving only ash. I didn't feel anything watching that smoke. Didn't feel horror or guilt or grief. Didn't feel anything at all. Just registered the information, filed it away, moved on to the next duty on the roster. That was on day 3 of the transition. No, day 3 of the Empire. I'd made a mark on my wall that night and thought, this is what we are now. This is what we do. We follow orders, and we don't ask questions, and we burn the people who showed us kindness. Render kept talking about the Jedi betrayal, kept reciting the propaganda, and I wanted to hit him, wanted to scream at him, wanted to grab his shoulders and shake him until he admitted he was lying, that he was just trying to make sense of something senseless, that he needed the lie because the truth was unbearable. But I didn't. I just listened to the drip, 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 and counted days on my wall, and waited for whatever came next. What came next was hunger. The rations ran out on day 131. So. Not reduced, gone. Empty storage lockers, bare shelves, nothing but dust and the smell of the food that used to be there. We'd been rationing carefully, making it last. But mathematics don't care about careful. Divide 39 men into dwindling supplies, and eventually, you hit 0 D1. Commander Thrace tried to contact High Command. Tried the Imperial Planetary Authority. Tried every frequency and contact code we had. Nothing. Static. Or worse than static, automated messages saying our clearance codes were invalid. Our unit designation didn't exist in the system. Please verify authorization and try again. We didn't exist. Not in the records. Not in the new empire. We were 47 men who'd become 39, who'd become ghosts, haunting a facility that was already scheduled for demolition. Some of the men talked about raiding the civilian settlements, taking what we needed. We were soldiers, trained and armed, and the local population was war-weary and scattered. It would be easy. But Thrace shut that down immediately. "We're not bandits," he said. His voice was hard, the hardest I'd heard it since the end of the war. "We're soldiers of the Republic. We have honor. We have discipline. We don't prey on the people we swore to protect. No. Others through? The Republic is gone, someone said. I think it was hardline. Anya DQ. We're not soldiers anymore. We're nothing. Then we're nothing with honor, Thrace replied. We voted on it. Democracy, the thing we'd fought to protect. 39 men deciding whether to become the monsters the galaxy was already treating us as. The vote was close. 20 to 19. We wouldn't raid. We wouldn't steal. We'd maintain discipline until the end, whatever that end looked like. The men who voted to raid left that night. Hardline, Render, 6 others, just took their weapons and walked out into the darkness, and we never saw them again. Maybe they found civilian settlements. Maybe they found work as mercenaries or guards or enforcers for the criminal syndicates that were already moving into the power vacuum. The war had left. Maybe they died on the road, shot by Imperial patrols or local defense forces who saw armed clones and thought threat. I didn't care. I was past caring. I was past most things by then. Just breathing in and out, following the routine, making marks on my wall. Day 133. Dashawaisai. Day 134. Tarig Mayor 34. Day 135. Dartui. Nield Sword. Memord Skirti. We started eating the ration paste that was supposed to be emergency backup. The stuff that tasted like chemical compound and had the texture of industrial sealand. It kept you alive, barely, gave you just enough calories to function. We'd called it clone chow during the war, joked about it, traded insults about who got stuck with it on long deployments. Nobody was joking now. We just ate in silence, gagging down the paste, feeling it sit heavy and wrong in our stomachs. Some men couldn't keep it down. Me just vomited it back up and tried again, over and over, because the alternative was starving. CT4 903 AA sketch. Because he'd been Render's friend, died on day 138. Malnutrition probably, or maybe just giving up. He went to sleep in his bunk and didn't wake up. His face was peaceful, like servos, like everyone who'd stopped fighting looked peaceful. We couldn't bury him properly. The ground was too hard, and we were too weak from hunger to dig. So we carried him to the equipment yard and left him there, covered with a tarp, and told ourselves we'd give him a proper burial when we had the strength. We never got the strength. The hallucinations started on day 142. Or maybe they'd started earlier, and I just hadn't noticed. Hard to tell when you're living on paste and recycled air, and the absolute certainty that you're going to die in this place, forgotten and alone. I saw my brothers sometimes. Not the ones still alive in the facility, but the ones from Camino, from training, from before we'd been deployed. They'd stand at the end of corridors watching me with empty eyes, and when I'd move toward them, they'd vanish like smoke. Like General Ura's funeral pyre. Like everything that used to matter. CT 8129 We called him Fix because he'd been Servo's assistant. Started talking to someone who wasn't there. A Kaminoan, he said. One of the instructors from Tipoca City. She was telling him he'd failed inspection, that he needed to report for decommissioning, that he wasn't fit for deployment. He'd argue with her, plead with her, promise to do better. Then he'd stop and stare at nothing and realize she wasn't real. But she felt real. He'd say afterward, she felt so real. Commander Thrace tried to maintain order. Tried to keep us following routine, doing inspections, standing watches. But what were we watching for? Who were we inspecting for? What was the point of routine when every day was just another step toward the same inevitable end? The power failed completely on day 149. The reactor finally gave out, or maybe we'd run out of fuel, or maybe the facility's automated systems decided we'd outlived our usefulness and shut everything down. Doesn't matter. The lights went out, the ventilation stopped, the heating died, and we were left in the dark with nothing but our breath and that endless drip, drip, drip of hydraulic fluid. We had chemical glow sticks. Emergency supplies. They gave off this sickly yellow light that made everything look diseased, made our faces look like skulls. We'd sit in the mess hall sometimes, all of us together, just sitting in that yellow darkness, not speaking, not moving, just breathing. In and out. In and out. Some men stopped breathing, just quietly gave up, let their bodies shut down from starvation or cold or despair. We'd find them in the morning, frozen in their bunks, faces peaceful, always peaceful. Like sleep was a gift we'd all been denied, and they'd finally claimed it for themselves. We were down to 17 men by day 156. 17 out of 47. 30 brothers dead or gone. 30 faces I'd known as well as my own. 30 voices that used to fill the barracks with the sounds of life. Games and stories and complaints and laughter, back when we'd had something to laugh about. Now there was just silence and cold, and that drip, drip, drip that never stopped, that kept time like a countdown to something we couldn't see but knew was coming. I stopped making marks on the wall on day 163. Not because I'd given up counting, but because I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. The cold had gotten into everything, into our bones, into our blood. We huddled together in the mess hall, sharing body heat, wrapped in every piece of clothing we could find. It didn't help much, just delayed the inevitable. CT 7221 on cricket, because he'd made a clicking sound with his mouth when he was nervous. Started singing on day 166. Old Mandalorian war songs, the ones the Kai Valdar had taught us during training on Camino. Songs about glory and honor and dying well. His voice was thin and cracked, barely audible, but he sang anyway. Sang until his voice gave out, until he couldn't make sounds anymore, until he just sat there with his mouth open, lips moving soundlessly. He died that night. Just stopped breathing in the middle of a verse. His mouth was still open, still singing something nobody could hear. Commander Thrace called us together on day 170. I don't say we chattered, all 14 of us. We gathered in the mess hall, that sickly yellow glow from the chemical sticks making us look like the ghosts we already were. This is an order, Thrace said. His voice was barely a whisper. We were all too weak for anything else. Anyone who wants to leave can leave. No judgment, no consequences, just go. Find something else, somewhere else. Nobody moved. Not because we were loyal, not because we were brave. Because there was nowhere to go. This was it. This facility, this tomb, this place where the Republic had forgotten us. This was where we'd die, and we all knew it, and leaving would just mean dying somewhere else. Somewhere without even the ghost of purpose to keep us company. Then we stay, Thrace said. We maintain discipline. We maintain honor. We die as soldiers, not as animals. CT5, 518, tap. Because he'd drum his fingers during briefings, laughed at that. A dry, rasping sound that barely qualified as laughter. We're already dead, he said. We've been dead since Palpatine gave the order. Since the Empire took over? Since they decided we weren't needed anymore. We're just too stubborn to stop breathing. Grace didn't argue. What was there to argue? Tap was right. We died with the Republic. Everything since then was just our bodies taking time to catch up with reality. The last of the ration paste ran out on day 174. We scraped the containers clean, licked the metal, tried to find one more calorie, one more moment of life. But there was nothing. Just empty containers, and the absolute certainty that we'd reach the end. Some men tried to eat other things. Insulation foam from the walls. Coolant fluid from the machinery. Anything that might have calories, might keep them alive one more day. It didn't work. Just made them sick, made them vomit up what little was left in their stomachs, made the dying harder. I sat in my bunk on day 176 and looked at the marks on the wall. 176 days since they told us the facility was closing. 176 days since we'd learned we were disposable, replaceable, forgettable. Property whose contracts had expired. I thought about General Yura, about the kindness in her eyes when she'd asked after our welfare, about the 3 blaster shots that had ended her life, about the smoke rising from the equipment yard, carrying away whatever justice or righteousness or purpose we'd thought we were serving. I thought about Servo, hanging in the shower block, about Sketch, lying under a tarp in the equipment yard, about Cricket, singing songs nobody could hear, about all my brothers who'd chosen the timing of their deaths, rather than waiting for starvation or cold or the simple biological shutdown of bodies designed to fight and given nothing to fight for. I thought about Camino, about Tipoca City, with its endless rain and sterile corridors, about the Kaminoans who'd grown us in their vats, engineered us for war, installed accelerated aging so we'd reach fighting maturity faster. We were 10 years old when they deployed us. 10 years old and ready to die for a republic that would throw us away the moment the dying wasn't needed anymore. Did they know? I wondered. Did the Kaminoans understand what they'd created? Not just soldiers, but slaves. Property. New. Things to be used and discarded. Did they care? Or were we just products to them? Merchandise to be sold to the highest bidder? I never got to ask them. Nobody did. The Empire shut down the cloning facilities not long after the war ended, killed the Kaminoans, destroyed the equipment, made sure nobody could ever make more of us. We were obsolete technology, replaced by regular recruits, by stormtroopers who enlisted voluntarily and could be blamed individually when things went wrong. Can't court-martial property. Strides. Can't hold slaves accountable. Can't make martyrs out of things that were never really alive in the eyes of the law. Commander Thrace died on day 179. Targuru. I found him in his quarters, sitting at his desk, hands folded neatly in front of him. He'd been writing something, a final report maybe, or a message to someone who would never read it. The stylus was still in his hand. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and his face had that same peaceful look they all had. I read what he'd written. It was an after-action report. Standard format, regulation, phrasing, mission parameters, maintain facility security and operational readiness, mission status complete, personnel status, all casualties accounted for, awaiting new orders. He dated it day 1 of the transition. Day 1 of the Empire. He'd written it then and never moved beyond it, just sat at that desk for 179 days, waiting for orders that never came, maintaining the fiction that we were still soldiers, still had purpose, still mattered. I put the stylus back in his hand, closed his eyes, left him sitting there at his desk. One more ghost in a facility full of them. We were down to 9 men. 9 clones who'd served the Republic faithfully, who'd followed every order, who'd done everything asked of them and more. 9 property units whose contracts had expired. 9 breathing corpses waiting for biology to catch up with bureaucracy. I went back to my bunk. I looked at the marks on the wall. 179. The number felt significant somehow, though I couldn't say why. Just another day in a long chain of days that led nowhere, meant nothing, changed nothing. The hallucinations were constant now. I'd see the mess hall full of brothers, everyone eating and talking and laughing like we had during the war. Then I'd blink and it would be empty again. Just shadows and chemical glow and that endless drip of hydraulic fluid. I'd see General Yura sometimes. She'd stand at the end of my bunk, looking at me with sad eyes, and I'd want to apologize. Want to explain that I'd just been following orders, that I hadn't wanted to kill her, that I hadn't had a choice. But the words wouldn't come. I just stuck in my throat like the ration paste we'd been eating, thick and chemical and wrong. She never spoke, just looked at me with those sad eyes, and then she'd fade away like smoke, like everything else, like the Republic, like our purpose, like the lie that we'd mattered. CT 3366 We called him Pitch because his voice was unusually deep. Tried to escape on day 181. Just started walking out of the barracks, through the corridors, toward the main gate. We didn't try to stop him. What was the point? If he wanted to die on the road instead of in the facility, that was his choice. At least it was a choice. At least he was deciding something for himself, for the first time in his life. He made it maybe 50 meters outside the gate, before he collapsed. We watched from the windows. Watched him fall, try to get up, fall again. Watched him lie there in the dirt, chest heaving, arms reaching for something we couldn't see. Watched him stop moving. Nobody went to get him. No. We were too weak. And anyway, what would be the point? Drag him back inside to die in the facility instead of outside? At least out there he could see the sky. At least out there he wasn't trapped. The others died over the next week. One by one, quietly, without drama. Just stopped breathing in their bunks or in the mess hall, or sitting at their duty stations, maintaining protocol until the very end. I'd find them in the morning, cold and still, and I'd think about how I should feel something. Grief or anger or loss. But there was nothing. Just information to register. Another brother gone. Another number subtracted from a shrinking total. I was alone on day 188. The last one left. CT 701894. Bracket. Die. Property of the Kaminoan cloning facilities on extended lease to the Republic military. Contract expired, awaiting final disposition. I walked through the empty facility. Through corridors that had been full of life and purpose, and now held only silence. Through the mess hall where we'd eaten together, complained together, existed together. Through the barracks where I'd slept among my brothers, surrounded by the sound of their breathing, the sound that told me I wasn't alone. Now there was just my breathing. Hiss and click. In and out. In and out. The only sound in the entire facility, except for that endless drip, drip, drip of hydraulic fluid, keeping time for nobody. I thought about ending it. About following Servo's example. About choosing the timing of my death, rather than letting starvation make the choice for me. Sorry. It would be easy. My rifle was still in the armory, cleaned and maintained, ready for orders that would never come. One shot. Quick and clean. Military efficiency applied to the final problem. But something stopped me. Not hope. There was no hope left. Not duty. There was no duty anymore. Not fear. I was past being afraid of death. Maybe it was just stubbornness. The same genetic stubbornness that had kept us fighting through impossible battles, that had made us efficient soldiers when efficiency meant watching brothers die and continuing the mission anyway. Or maybe it was something simpler. Maybe I just wanted to see how the story ended. Wanted to know if anyone would ever come, if anyone would ever remember. If our deaths would be recorded somewhere in some database, or if we'd just be erased completely. 47 men who'd never existed in any way that mattered. I made it to day 196 before the delirium really set in. Not hallucinations anymore. Something deeper. I'd lose time, find myself in different parts of the facility with no memory of walking there. I'd be in the mess hall, and then suddenly, I'd be in the data archives, or the armory, or standing on the landing pad staring at the rust on the old consular class cruisers. The drip, drip got louder. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe my hearing was just failing, focusing on that one sound because it was the only constant. The only thing that proved time was still passing. Drip. T. Still alive. Drip. Dot. Still breathing. Drip. D. Still existing in some technical sense, even if existence had lost any meaning beyond biological process. I talked to myself sometimes. Had conversations with brothers who weren't there. Reported to Commander Thrace about supply levels and patrol rotations. We discussed tactical scenarios with Servo. Listened to Cricket's silent songs. They felt real. More real than the empty facility, than the cold, than the gnawing hunger that had become so constant, I barely noticed it anymore. On day 203, I made it to the communications room. Took me most of the day. My legs barely worked anymore, and I had to rest every few meters. But I made it. God made it. Sat down at the console and started sending out distress calls. Emergency frequencies. Every channel I could access. This is CT 7000-1894. Facility 7, Anaxes. I transmitted. My voice was barely a whisper. Requesting assistance. Requesting extraction. Requesting acknowledgement of receipt. Static. K.O. Just static. The same static we'd been hearing for 203 days. I kept transmitting anyway. Over and over. The same message on every frequency. Because what else was there to do? I was a soldier. Soldiers reported. Yao. Soldiers followed protocol. Soldiers maintained communications, discipline, even when communicating with nobody. CT 7000-1894, Facility 7, requesting assistance. Last survivor of Crush Company, 2nd Battalion, multiple casualties. Requesting orders, requesting acknowledgement. Drip, drip, died. The hydraulic fluid kept time. Static kept time. My breathing kept time. The universe kept turning, kept existing, and none of it cared about one clone in an abandoned facility, transmitting messages into the void. I thought about Jango Fett sometimes. Our Father, in the only sense that mattered. The template. The man whose DNA they'd copied 2 million times to make an army. Did he know what he was creating? Did he understand that his genes would be used to make slaves, property, things designed to die efficiently for a republic that would discard them the moment the dying stopped being useful? He'd been a bounty hunter, a mercenary, a man who chose his jobs, chose his risks, chose his life, and they'd used him to make men who'd never choose anything, whose entire existence was predetermined from the moment they achieved consciousness in a Kaminoan vat. I wondered if he'd ever felt guilty about that. If he'd cared at all, probably not. He'd gotten paid well, died before seeing what his legacy became. Maybe that was a mercy. Maybe knowing would have been worse than death, though I doubted anything could be worse than this. Than being the last echo of a scream nobody heard, the final mark in a database nobody checked, the period at the end of a sentence nobody would ever read. Day 27. Or maybe 208. I'd stopped making marks. Stopped counting. Yeah, why you make me sober? Mentors stopped counting. Time had lost meaning beyond the biological on daylight, through the windows, darkness, daylight again. My body kept processing it, kept moving through the cycles, even though my mind had drifted somewhere else. I found myself in the equipment yard. Don't remember walking there. But suddenly, I was standing among the bodies, the ones we'd covered with tarps, the ones we'd promised to bury properly. The tarps had blown away or deteriorated, and now they were just lying there. Brothers reduced to remains, flesh going back to the elements. Sketch was there. CT4, 903. His face wasn't peaceful anymore. Just empty. Just gone. The expression had rotted away along with everything else, leaving only the suggestion of features, the ghost of the person he'd been. I sat down next to him. The ground was cold, but I barely felt it. Barely felt anything. Just sat there among the dead, and thought about how I'd be joining them soon. How someone would eventually find this place and discover a facility full of corpses. 47 identical bodies in various states of decay. Would they wonder what happened? Would they care? Or would they just make a note in some report, decommissioned clone facility, casualties from transition period and move on to more important business? I hoped they wouldn't care. Hoped nobody would waste time feeling guilt or sadness or regret over property that had fulfilled its function. We'd been tools. When tools wear out, tools get replaced. That's efficiency. That's the natural order of things. The Empire understood that. Better than the Republic had? Maybe. The Republic had dressed it up in rhetoric about duty and honor and sacrifice. The Empire just acknowledged the truth. Some beings matter and some don't, and the ones who don't are used until they're used up, and then they're forgotten. We'd been built for war. War ended. Function fulfilled. Contract expired. The simple mathematics. The kind I'd always been good at. Brackets and parentheticals and order of operations. First you grow the soldiers. Then you deploy them. Then you use them. Then you dispose of them. Clean, white, efficient, logical, and bowing to. I laughed at that. Or tried to. It came out as more of a rasping sound, painful in my dry throat. But it felt good somehow. Finding the humor in it, the absolute cosmic joke of our existence. We'd been so proud once, so certain of our purpose, so sure that we mattered, and we hadn't, not even a little. We'd been inventory, no, a blur, line items on a spreadsheet, assets to be depreciated, day 212. I know because I found myself back in my bunk, staring at the marks on the wall. And I realized I'd started counting again without meaning to. 4 new marks, scratched into the metal with a fingernail. My fingernail. I didn't remember doing it. The body remembers routine, even when the mind has let go. Muscle memory, genetic programming. The same thing that made us stand at attention when an officer entered the room, that made us clean our weapons even when there was nothing to fight, that made us follow orders even when the orders led to our own destruction. We weren't men. Not really. We were instinct wrapped in flesh, performance programmed into DNA. Take away the performance and all that's left is flesh, waiting to stop being flesh, waiting to become just matter, just atoms, just the raw materials that would eventually form something else. I wondered what I'd become. Fertilizer for the Annex's soil, maybe. Nutrients for whatever plants eventually grew in the equipment yard. My atoms mixing with my brother's atoms, all of us together again, indistinguishable, identical even in death. That felt right somehow. Appropriate. Not you. We'd been indistinguishable in life. Why not in death too? The pain stopped on day 215. Not because anything got better, just because my body had run out of energy to process pain. Everything felt distant now, muted, like I was experiencing it through layers of insulation. Cold, hunger, exhaustion, all just information, data points my brain registered but couldn't quite connect to the concept of suffering. I'd entered the final stage. I knew that. The body shutting down, conserving what little it had left for critical functions. Soon, even those would fail. Heart would stop. Mew. Brain would go dark. The breathing would end. That hiss and click that had been the soundtrack to my entire existence. In and out. In and out. Each breath shallower than the last. I made it to the communications room one final time. Don't know what day it was. Didn't matter. I sat at the console and transmitted one last message. CT-7, 1894. Facility 7, Annaxes. Final report. Das Year. Mission parameters. Maintain facility security and operational readiness. Mission status. Complete. Personnel status. All casualties. Crash Company, 2nd Battalion. Dolo Mamasu Biaster. 47 men. Waikildi Kuride. Good soldiers. You will. All of us. Wayanti. Good soldiers who followed orders and did our duty and died when we weren't needed anymore. Me? Oh. My voice was barely audible. Maybe the transmission didn't even make it past the facility walls. Maybe it just echoed through empty corridors and died in the static. We were good soldiers, I said again. We mattered. We had to matter. Please, someone, anyone, tell us we mattered. Static. You are. Just static. The same answer we'd been getting for 200 and whatever days. I turned off the console, sat in the darkness, listened to the drip 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 of hydraulic fluid, that constant companion, that metronome marking time nobody needed marked. And I understood then. Really understood. Not the intellectual understanding I'd had since the decommissioning order, but something deeper. Cellular Dodd. The understanding that comes when you're dying, and all the lies you told yourself to survive fall away, and you're left with just truth. We'd never mattered. Not to the Republic. Not to the Empire. Not to the galaxy. We'd been a resource, exploited and depleted, and now we were waste, waiting to be cleaned up and forgotten. All those battles we'd fought. All those brothers we'd lost. All that sacrifice and blood and pain. All of it for nothing. For a republic that became an empire that discarded us like broken equipment. For Jedi we'd murdered on command. For civilians who went home to families while we died in facilities, nobody would remember. For nothing. I made it back to my bunk somehow. Laid down on the thin mattress that I'd slept on for years, that smelled like recycled air and regulation issue soap, and all the nights I'd spent surrounded by my brothers, listening to them breathe, taking comfort in not being alone. I was alone now. Completely. Utterly. The last man in a tomb that used to be a fortress. I looked at the marks on the wall one final time. All those days. No. All that counting. No. All that desperate need to measure time, to prove that our existence meant something beyond biological process. The marks would fade eventually. Weather and decay would erase them, just like the Empire had erased us from the records, just like history would erase us from memory. Some archaeologist might find this facility someday, centuries from now, and wonder what happened here. Or maybe not. Maybe they just see old walls and corroded equipment, and never think about the men who died inside them. That was fine. That was appropriate. We'd been designed to be forgotten. Disposable heroes. Property whose value expired when the war ended. I closed my eyes. The darkness was complete. Absolute. The kind of darkness that exists before birth and after death. The darkness we'd all come from and would all return to. I thought I heard breathing. Not mine. Mine was barely there anymore, just the faintest movement of air. But breathing all around me. Dozens of brothers, the whole company together again. Cricket was singing. Servo was laughing about something. Commander Thrace was giving a briefing about tomorrow's duty assignments. General Euro was there too, kind and alive, asking after our welfare, remembering our names. It felt real. More real than the cold, or the hunger, or the facility. Maybe it was. Maybe reality was just what the brain created in the final moments, and this version was better than the truth. Maybe dying meant getting to choose your own reality. Finally, after a lifetime of having reality chosen for you. Good soldiers, I whispered. Or tried to. My lips might have moved. Might not have. We were good soldiers. The breathing continued. In and out. In and out. All of us together, breathing in rhythm, breathing as one. The way we'd marched, fought, lived, died. Together. Always together. Even when we were alone. Especially when we were alone. The sound faded. Oh, the breathing, the dripping, everything faded into something vast and quiet and patient. Something that had been waiting since the day they'd grown me in that vat on Camino. Waiting through training and deployment and war and abandonment. Waiting for this moment when the breath finally stopped and the body finally understood what the mind had known for weeks. I was inventory. Thou. Used up. Diawas normite. Disposed of. TT. 7,1894. Bracket. Dut. A soldier who'd served faithfully and died forgotten. One of 47. T. 1 of 2 million. One a genetic line that would be remembered only as a footnote in history, if it was remembered at all. The Grand Army of the Republic, clone soldiers used during the Clone Wars, later replaced by enlisted stormtroopers. That's all we'd ever be. A transitional technology. A solution to a temporary problem. Assets acquired, deployed, and depreciated according to standard accounting practices. The drip drip. Stop. Or maybe I just stopped hearing it. Hard to tell when consciousness starts to fragment, when the self begins to dissolve into the darkness that's always been waiting underneath. I'd counted 217 days. 217 days since they'd told us we were disposable. Since we'd learned that loyalty and duty and sacrifice meant nothing to the systems we'd served. Since we'd discovered that honor was a story they told us to make us compliant, to make us accept our role as property. But we'd been disposable from the beginning. From the moment they'd mixed Jango Fett's DNA in a Kaminoan laboratory. From the moment they'd accelerated our growth so we'd mature faster, die younger, never live long enough to question our purpose. From the moment they'd installed obedience so deep it was indistinguishable from instinct. We'd been born disposable. We'd lived disposable. We died disposable. And somewhere, in some database, someone would eventually update a record. Facility 7, Annaxes, decommissioned. Clone personnel, deceased, status, complete. 1 line. Maybe 2. That's all we'd get. That's all we'd ever been worth. The darkness was complete now. Total. Dietary. I couldn't feel my body anymore. Couldn't feel the cold or the hunger or the bunk underneath me. Couldn't feel anything except the memory of breathing. That hiss and click that had meant I was alive. That had meant I had purpose. That had meant I was exactly what I was designed to be. In and out. In and out. In Shu. The silence that followed was vast. Immense. The silence of abandoned facilities and forgotten wars and property that had fulfilled its function. The silence of the galaxy moving on, spinning through space, uncaring and eternal. 47 men had lived at Facility 7. 47 men had served the Republic faithfully. 47 men had done everything asked of them and more. 47 men had died when they were no longer needed. The last one died alone on day 217 in a bunk in a facility that was already scheduled for demolition. His name was Sheka D. 7,1894. Nobody came for the body. Nobody filed a report. Hey, nobody remembered. The hydraulic fluid continued to drip in the empty corridors, pooling in the grates, dark and viscous. Drip, drip, drip. Keeping time for nobody. Marking days that didn't matter. Oh, counting down to nothing. The Republic had needed an army, so they'd made one. Grown it in vats. Trained it to obey. Deployed it to fight. Used it to win their war. And when the war ended, when the Republic became an empire, when the fighting stopped and the dying wasn't necessary anymore, they'd simply stopped. Stopped supplying. Stopped communicating. Stopped acknowledging that the men they'd created still existed, still needed food and purpose, and some small recognition that their service had meant something. It was efficient. It was logical. It was the perfect solution to the problem of what to do with millions of soldiers designed for a war that had ended. Just let them fade away. Let them starve. Let them die in forgotten facilities scattered across the galaxy. Let them disappear like smoke, like the memory of a republic that had never really existed anyway. No trials. No executions. No public acknowledgement of guilt or responsibility. Just silence. Just administrative neglect. Just the quiet genocide of men who'd fought for a government that had never seen them as anything more than equipment. Property doesn't get retirement. Property doesn't get pensions. Property doesn't get honored or remembered or more. Property gets used until it breaks, and then it gets thrown away. Facility 7 sat empty for 3 more years before the demolition crews arrived. They tore it down in 2 weeks. Ahem. Recycled the metal. Cleared the foundation. Turned the equipment yard into a parking structure for the civilian workforce that had moved back into the region. They found the bodies, of course. 47 of them, scattered throughout the facility. Identical faces in various states of decay. Why? Clone soldiers, clearly. Victims of the transition period, most likely. The foreman filed a report. Why? The local authorities made a note. Someone from the Imperial Planetary Authority reviewed the information and marked the case as closed. Facility 7, annexes. Decommissioned personnel, deceased. No further action required. That was all. That was everything. 47 lives reduced to 1 sentence in a file that nobody would ever read. The bodies were cremated. Standard procedure for unidentified remains. The ashes were disposed of according to regulation. No ceremony. No memorial. No recognition that these had been men who'd lived and fought and died for something they believed mattered. Just ashes in the wind. Just atoms returning to the universe. Just the final disposal of property that had outlived its usefulness. And the galaxy moved on. The Empire rose. The rebellion formed. Wars continued. Different wars, with different soldiers who enlisted voluntarily and could be made to care about their own deaths. The Clone Wars became history, then legend, then a footnote in textbooks that barely mentioned the men who'd fought them. CT-7, 1894, Dartu 9. Bracket, Da. A soldier who'd counted days on a wall and died alone and understood, in his final moments, exactly what he'd been worth to the galaxy he'd served. Nothing. Less than nothing. A problem solved through administrative neglect. That was the horrifying life of a clone left after the war. Not the dying. The dying was mercy. The dying was release. The horror was the understanding. The realization that loyalty was a tool used to control you. That duty was a lie, told to make you compliant. That honor was a story they told to make you accept your own exploitation. The horror was learning that you'd been property all along, that every moment of pride you'd felt, every sense of purpose, every belief that you mattered was just programming. Genetic manipulation designed to make you efficient, obedient, disposable. The horror was counting days on a wall, and watching your brothers die, and realizing that nobody cared. Nobody was coming. Nobody remembered. Nobody would ever acknowledge that 47 men had served faithfully, and died slowly, and suffered completely, and meant nothing to anyone. The horror was the drip, drip, drip of hydraulic fluid, keeping time in an empty facility, marking days for nobody, counting down to silence. The horror was breathing in and out, until the breathing stopped, and discovering that the universe didn't notice. That was the life of a clone left after the war. That was the fate of disposable heroes. That was the truth they'd hidden underneath all the propaganda about duty and honor, and the glory of service to the Republic. You were property. You served your function. And when you weren't needed anymore, you were forgotten. Completely. Utterly. Finally. In the darkness of an abandoned facility on Anaxes, in a bunk that smelled like recycled air and regulation soap, CT 7th 1894 discovered that truth in his final moments. And then he stopped breathing. And the universe continued exactly as it had before. Unchanged. Uncaring. Eternal.